Everyone in the town of Oak Ridge whispered the name Karen Wallace like it was a curse. A warning passed between neighbors like tales of a lurking storm. She wasn't a storm. She was the flood, the wind, and the thunder that shattered peace. With one icy glare and a clipboard in her hand, the moment a new neighbor unpacked boxes or a child rode a scooter 1 inch off the sidewalk, Karen was there fuming, yelling, snapping pictures, and quoting HOA rules like they were sacred scripture, etched into her soul. No one had ever challenged her authority because they were either too afraid or too tired of fighting with a woman who made Neighborhood Watch feel like a military regime. She wasn't elected to power. She clawed her way into it, hosting barbecue. Elections where anyone not in her good graces mysteriously didn't get the voting flyers. Her dominance was so complete that even the town's official HOA board acted like her personal enforcers. But all that was about to change the day the Millers moved in because they weren't like the rest. They weren't loud or brash or rule breakers. They were just ... normal. Too normal for Karen's liking. It was a Monday morning when she first noticed them, Tom and Rachel Miller. Along with their 2 young sons carrying moving boxes into the cream-colored 2-story house on the corner of Elm and Pine, Karen stood at her window, tipping black coffee like it was poison, and watched them. She saw the boys laughing, the dog barking, and Rachel gently placing potted plants on the porch. That porch hadn't seen a family in over 2 years, since the Jenkins had fled town after Karen forced them to repaint their fence 6 times in 3 months. They don't know, Karen muttered, slamming her mug down, but they'll learn. By noon, she was standing at their doorstep, sunglasses on, arms crossed, her HOA folder thick with documents. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said. Without a smile, Tom wiped his hands on his jeans and offered a handshake. "Thanks, we're excited to be here." Karen ignored the hand. "I just wanted to make sure you received the HOA compliance packet. It includes lawn maintenance requirements, parking restrictions, trash bin placement rules, porch decor guidelines, pet leash laws, holiday decoration limitations, mailbox color regulations, and the complete list of approved house paint swatches." Rachel blinked. "Mailbox color regulations?" "Yes," Karen replied flatly. "Black, white, or standard aluminum. I'll give you 3 days to repaint it. Yours appears to be blue. That's non-compliant." Before Rachel could respond, Karen handed her the packet and turned away like a general issuing marching orders. That night, Rachel laughed it off, thinking it was just a quirky neighbor, but Tom didn't laugh. "There's something off about her," he said. "She watched me for an hour through binoculars when I was trimming the hedges." By Wednesday, Karen had reported them for 3 violations: mailbox color, leaving a garden hose coiled on the lawn, and the children's basketball hoop not being stored inside the garage. She delivered each notice in person with a thick red stamp that read "correction required, 48 hours. The kids had been outside playing when she screamed at them for bouncing the ball on shared community sidewalk space, even though it was clearly in front of their own home. Tom, trying to be civil, approached Karen the next morning and asked for a conversation. She met him on the sidewalk like it was a negotiation with a foreign dictator. "Karen, look, we just moved in," he said. "We're trying to settle. Can you give us a little breathing room?" "Breathing room is what causes neighborhoods to decay," Karen snapped. "I'm here to maintain standards. You signed the agreement when you bought the home. I enforce the rules, I don't make them." "Think you do both," Tom said quietly, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned closer. "Watch yourself. Mr. Miller, I know exactly what goes on around here." That night, their trash bins were overturned. Tom found Karen standing across the street holding her phone, filming him as he cleaned it up. She accused him of illegal disposal of yard waste, citing footage she claimed to have from her Ring camera. Now, frightened, begged Tom to let it go, but Tom was furious. He called the HOA office, but the line went straight to voicemail. He sent an email and got an automated response. Neighbor 2 doors down, Ms. Hendricks, knocked on their door that evening. "You're not the first," she whispered. "Karen controls the board. She has friends in the city records office. She once got a couple evicted over a Halloween inflatable. Had a ghost on the lawn. Karen said it was disturbing to Christian sensibilities." Rachel gasped. "That's insane." Ms. Hendricks nodded. "You can either submit or move," Most people move, but the Millers weren't most people. Tom worked in private security and had dealt with petty tyrants before. He started collecting his own documentation, setting up cameras, logging every incident, and the more he resisted, the more aggressive Karen became. She screamed at Rachel in public over a wind chime. She threatened to have their dog seized over a false bite report. She filed a noise complaint against the children for excessive laughter, but it escalated sharply when Karen appeared on their front lawn with a city code enforcement officer, waving papers in his face. This family is in violation of fence height ordinances and grass length tolerances, she barked. The officer, visibly uncomfortable, tried to de-escalate. Ma'am, this is just a courtesy visit. There's no active citation. Yet Karen hissed. Rachel stepped outside, her hands trembling. This is harassment, Karen's head snapped toward her like a viper. No, this is protection. I protect this town from people like you who think the rules don't apply. That night, someone scratched Tom's truck. The tires were flattened. Their mailbox was smashed in. The police took a report but did nothing. There's no evidence, the officer said, shrugging. But Karen knew there wouldn't be any. She never left a trace. She used HOA power as her shield and intimidation as her sword. Still, Tom wasn't backing down. He filed a complaint directly to the city's oversight department, bypassing the local board. Karen got wind of it. That's when she escalated into full war. The following morning, 3 tow trucks appeared on their street. Karen claimed Tom's car was parked 1 inch over the boundary line and had it hauled. Citation appeared on their door for excessive bird feed attracting pests. Karen walked by, holding her phone up like a weapon. This is what happens when people refuse to follow the rules. Tom stared at her, seething. But Karen just smiled, that chilling, triumphant smile she wore every time she broke someone's spirit. And yet Tom's spirit hadn't broken. It had hardened. And what Karen didn't know was that the city had finally responded to his complaint. What they found was about to unravel everything she had built, and Karen would soon learn that her reign of terror was about to face something she never expected. Resistance. Karen Wallace had built her little empire on silence, fear, and compliance, and until now, no one had dared to defy her so publicly or so persistently. Which is why when she received the official envelope from the Oak Ridge Municipal Office, marked with the seal of the City Oversight Department, her hands trembled for the first time in years. She tore it open in her kitchen, steam rising from her untouched coffee, and read the letter that stated a formal investigation had been opened into the Oak Ridge Hills HOA for abuse of authority, misuse of fines, and failure to maintain equitable board elections. The signature at the bottom read, Lead Investigator, Erica Jensen, Municipal Oversight Division, and Karen nearly crushed the paper in her hand. Her fingers immediately reached for her phone, dialing a number memorized long ago. Diane, she said, voice tense. We've got a problem. The new family, the Millers, they filed a complaint. It's gone to the city.
Dad!
They're coming here. Diane, her second in command on the HOA board, sighed nervously. Karen, maybe we should step back for a bit. Cool things down. You've been really hard on them. Karen slammed her hand down on the granite countertop. You listen to me. That family is trying to dismantle everything we've built. If we let this go, we'll have people planting flamingos and flying sports flags. This neighborhood will collapse. I'm not backing down. Not now, not ever. She ended the call and marched out to her garage. Rifling through years of paper files she kept meticulously sorted, one for every household. Every violation, every rumor and whisper ever spoken in Oak Ridge. She needed leverage on the Millers, something to force them into submission. Meanwhile, Tom was quietly preparing for the next wave of Karen's wrath. The response from the city had been a spark of hope, but he knew she wouldn't go down without a fight. He upgraded his home security system, installed cameras in both the front and backyard, and began recording all HOA interactions. He started speaking to neighbors who had long since gone silent. One by one, they opened up. A single mother named Lacey admitted Karen had fined her $500 for her satellite dish being visible from the street. A retired Army vet named Grant revealed Karen had tried to evict him for planting an American flag garden without written approval. These people had been steamrolled, isolated, and silenced, but Tom gave them a voice again. They met in his garage. Late at night, with the door closed and the lights low, passed around copies of the city's investigation letter. "They can't do this to us forever," Tom said. "But they won't stop unless we stand together." The neighbors nodded, some still unsure, some still scared. But a spark had ignited in Oak Ridge. Karen sensed the shift before she saw it. On a Tuesday morning walk, her daily patrol, clipboard in hand, she noticed something strange. A boy on a skateboard zipped past her, music playing from his backpack, and no one yelled at him. A few doors down, a couple had strung twinkle lights around their porch for a birthday. And when Karen stopped to photograph it, the woman waved at her mockingly. Even Diane, usually her loyal enforcer, avoided eye contact when Karen brought up the strategic response plan to the city inquiry. "It's just ... Maybe we need a lawyer," Diane murmured. "People are talking, Karen. They're saying you've gone too far." Karen's jaw clenched. She didn't care what people said. She only cared that they obeyed. And now Tom Miller was at the center of this rebellion. So she set a trap. That weekend, she filed an emergency HOA complaint against the Millers for unapproved construction activity after Tom replaced a loose porch step. She had the security footage edited to make it look like Tom had altered structural supports, which was a violation requiring HOA board review and city inspection. She filed it as an urgent safety matter, bypassing the normal protocol, and demanded a cease and desist order on any further repairs. Early the next morning, Karen appeared at their door with a private security agent, someone she hired through a contact in her real estate circle, and issued a formal notice, complete with a forged HOA seal. Tom took the paper, glanced at it, then looked her dead in the eye. "You forged this." Karen smiled coolly. "I'm the acting president of this HOA. Everything I do is authorized." "You made up a safety violation, and you're impersonating a city officer now," Tom said, holding up his phone, which had recorded the entire exchange. Karen's face twitched. "Delete that. You don't have permission to record me?" "I don't need it," Tom replied. "We're on my property." Rachel stepped beside her husband. "Leave our home now." Karen turned away, lips tight, but something cracked inside her. That night, she began making calls not to lawyers or board members, but to a man named Craig, who used to run compliance cleanup jobs for Karen back when she needed residents scared straight. Craig was an HOA. He wasn't even from Oak Ridge. He was the kind of man who would dump garbage on someone's lawn or break a window to make a point. And Karen didn't care how messy it got anymore. Craig agreed to visit the Millers. And by dawn the next day, Tom's security camera caught a masked figure lurking near the back fence. But Tom had anticipated retaliation. He called the police, showed them the footage, and finally, after weeks of harassment, an officer took it seriously. "This person's not from around here," the officer admitted after running the plates from a car parked down the street. "It's got priors. Suspicious activity, intimidation, petty assault." Karen was called in for questioning, and while she denied knowing Craig personally, her call records told another story. When she returned home, red-faced and rattled, she found a printed letter taped to her door signed by over 20 residents. It demanded her resignation from the HOA board, effective immediately, pending the outcome of the city's investigation. It wasn't a vote. It wasn't a request. It was a warning. But Karen didn't resign. She didn't apologize. She doubled down. The next morning, she went door to door handing out community emergency preparedness notices that accused the Millers of endangering the neighborhood by violating safety codes, hiding criminal affiliations, and instigating chaos. In a peaceful town, she cited fictitious bylaws, misquoted regulations, and used her fake authority to stir fear. Several neighbors refused to take the papers. Others tore them in half. One elderly woman who had lived in Oak Ridge for 30 years shut her door in Karen's face without a word. Karen stood on the porch, stunned. Her control was slipping fast. She returned home and locked her doors. She spent hours poring over the HOA rulebook, searching for one last weapon, one last clause that could save her. but she couldn't find one that hadn't already been exposed or discredited. She opened her laptop and found 24 emails from city officials, neighbors, and even former HOA members, all demanding accountability. She ignored them all and sat alone in the dark. The next evening, Tom received a visit from investigator Erica Jensen. She asked to walk the neighborhood to see the properties Karen had targeted. Tom obliged, and together they spoke to victims' real, living proof of Karen's campaign of cruelty. Jensen was calm, professional, but beneath her polite demeanor, Tom saw the storm building. She said, "I've never seen a community this manipulated before. But don't worry, we're moving toward formal charges. I promise you this won't be buried." Tom nodded. "She thinks she's invincible. They always do," Jensen said. Across the street, Karen peeked through her blinds and saw the investigator speaking with her enemies. She clutched her phone, fingers trembling. She still had one number left to call, an old friend on the county zoning board, someone who owed her a favor. She whispered into the phone, "I need a citation issued. Something real, something serious. Hit them where it hurts." She hung up and smiled for the first time in days. But outside, the neighborhood had changed. Lights stayed on late into the night. People who hadn't spoken in years were now gathered on porches, comparing notes, telling stories, building trust. The fear was breaking, and in its place was something stronger: unity. Karen didn't know it yet, but she had awakened something in Oak Ridge Hills that wouldn't be silenced again. And as the city closed in and her allies disappeared, the one untouchable queen of the HOA would soon face the very reckoning she spent years avoiding. Karen Wallace had never known real fear, not the kind that crept under your skin in the quiet hours of night when the silence felt like a scream waiting to happen. But now it clung to her like sweat, and she could feel it crawling through her. Once iron-clad composure, every time she glanced out her window and saw her kingdom slipping through her fingers. The town was no longer whispering about her. They were speaking openly, loudly, without shame or fear, and it enraged her beyond measure. Her calls to the zoning official went unanswered now. Her backup plan to issue a real citation against the Millers had stalled in some bureaucratic limbo because the city investigator, Erica Jensen, had begun personally visiting every department. Karen had once manipulated. Karen's name had become radioactive, her emails marked as flagged, her requests frozen under internal review. But she wasn't done, not yet. It's in her mind. She still had cards to play, still had loyalty left in corners. People wouldn't think to check. On a rainy Friday morning, she drove to the home of Randall Kirkwood, a quiet, older man who lived 3 blocks away and had served as treasurer on the HOA board since 2012. Karen had kept Randall on the board by shielding him from a tax audit. The HOA nearly triggered during a messy landscaping contract 6 years earlier. She expected loyalty. Instead, she found betrayal. Randall opened the door, but wouldn't let her in. "We're done, Karen," he said before she could speak. "I turned over all the financial records to the city. They know about the slush fund. They know you built the HOA for personal legal fees, the private security, parking enforcement you created without a vote." Karen stared at him like he'd stabbed her. "You were always too weak for this," she hissed, but he didn't respond. He closed the door quietly, and Karen stood there, drenched in the rain, shivering not from the cold, but from the realization that her last true ally had just shut her out. Across town, Tom and Rachel Miller were seeing the tide finally turn. Neighbors were bringing them baked goods, handwritten notes of support, and even old documentation of Karen's abuses. One neighbor gave them an audio recording from a 2019 board meeting in which Karen could be heard shouting down a homeowner who questioned where thousands of dollars in beautification fees had gone. Another neighbor turned over copies of emails where Karen had threatened to revoke pool access to families who didn't attend her voluntary meetings. Tom carefully compiled all of it, working with investigator Jensen to build what was now a full criminal case. But Tom wasn't satisfied with just exposure. He wanted permanent change. He and several other residents began preparing a formal recall vote to dissolve the current HOA board entirely and call for new elections under city oversight. They put up flyers, created a neighborhood website, and began door-to-door visits to inform residents of their rights. Karen watched it all unfold from her window, eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights and too much coffee, heart hammering with a kind of panic she had never felt before. She began pacing through her house, muttering to herself, flipping through old records like she was searching for a spell to reverse time. She couldn't accept, it couldn't fathom a world where she wasn't feared, wasn't obeyed. She made one last attempt to regain control by organizing an emergency HOA meeting at the community center. Post, signs that said mandatory attendance in bold red letters. But when the day arrived, only 8 people showed up, 6 of them reporters, 1 undercover city auditor, and 1 man in a suit who silently recorded the entire meeting on his phone. Karen stood at the podium and gave a furious, rambling speech about neighborhood decay, how the Millers were outsiders trying to destroy tradition, how the city was colluding to strip power from lawful citizen boards, and how she had been targeted because she was a woman who enforced order in a chaotic world. Her voice cracked as she ranted, and the longer she spoke, the more those in the audience exchanged glances, uncomfortable and even pitying. At one point, she held up a chart showing declining lawn quality and claimed it was proof of moral collapse. A reporter raised a hand. "Ms. Wallace, did you authorize HOA funds to hire a man with a criminal record to stalk a resident's home?" Karen's face went pale. "That's a lie," she snapped. "That footage was doctored. They're framing me." But the journalist didn't back down. "We've confirmed the man's identity. He's the same individual arrested last year for intimidation. He was hired 2 days before he appeared at the Miller's home. That timeline matches your call records." Karen screamed, then a high, sharp sound that silenced the room. "This meeting is over," she shouted, slamming her binder closed and storming out, cameras flashing behind her as she disappeared into the parking lot. But the damage had been done. The city pulled its final trigger. They froze the HOA's financial accounts, suspended all board authority pending the investigation's conclusion, and issued a public notice declaring the HOA in violation of municipal code and under formal receivership. That meant Karen's power was going to not chipped, not eroded, but completely revoked. She was no longer president of the HOA. She had no legal standing. But even in her fall, Karen refused to acknowledge defeat. That night, she stood outside the Miller's house wearing a raincoat, holding a flashlight, snapping pictures of their front yard, muttering into a recorder about code violations. Tom stepped outside, phone in hand, and calmly said, "Karen, it's over. Go home." She didn't move. Rachel stood beside her husband. "You're trespassing. We've called the police." Karen's face twisted with something between hatred and heartbreak. "You destroyed this place," she whispered. "I made it beautiful. I made it safe." "You made people miserable," Rachel replied. "You turned neighbors into prisoners." Karen took one step closer before headlights swept across the street. Police cruiser rolled to a stop and 2 officers stepped out. One of them sighed. "Karen Wallace." She turned slowly. "Yes, you've been warned about harassment. We have a report from the city that your presence here violates the protective order filed against you this morning. You're under arrest." "Order?" Karen gasped, suddenly confused. I didn't hurt anyone." "You hired a man to threaten a family," the officer replied. "You filed over 60 false complaints in 6 weeks. You used HOA funds without consent. It's criminal misconduct and harassment under city law." On her wrists, Karen cried out, not in pain but in disbelief. Her neighbors watched silently from windows and porches. No one shouted. No one protested. Some felt sorrow, some felt relief, but no one helped her. She was driven away in silence. Back inside their home, Tom turned off the lights and sat beside Rachel on the couch. The kids slept upstairs, unaware of how close their family had come to being forced out of the life they were building. "Is it finally over?" Rachel whispered. Tom looked toward the dark window. "Not yet," he said. "We still have to rebuild everything she broke." And outside, though the town of Oak Ridge Hills was still soaked in fear and fractured by years of tension, the first signs of healing had begun to bloom. But the storm wasn't finished, not until the community stood together, not until new leadership emerged. Not until every last thread of Karen Wallace's iron grip was torn from the fabric of the town she once ruled. The arrest of Karen Wallace sent shockwaves through Oak Ridge Hills like a thunderclap after a long drought, both cleansing and deafening, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt a strange, unfamiliar silence, no screeching complaints. No threatening notices, no patrols with flashlights inspecting porch lights or mailbox heights. But the absence of her presence didn't instantly repair the damage she had inflicted. In fact, the town now stood on the edge of an identity crisis, its people trying to rediscover who they were without the shadow of a tyrant looming over them. The very same residents who once lowered their voices in fear when her name was mentioned now spoke openly at kitchen tables, neighborhood gatherings, and community forums, asking the same questions. How had they let it go this far? How could one woman rule so completely over so many people with just a clipboard, a list of rules, and a twisted version of neighborhood pride? The city, having taken control of the HOA under a formal receivership process, appointed an independent management firm to oversee day-to-day operations until new elections could be held. They also initiated mandatory ethics training for any future HOA board candidates, issued an apology letter to all residents, and opened a fund to begin reimbursing improperly fined homeowners. But despite these institutional changes, the emotional repair was a slower, more delicate process. Tom Miller had become the reluctant face of the resistance, and while many thanked him, brought him meals, and offered help, he never sought praise. He spent most of his time meeting with city officials, preparing testimony for the upcoming hearing against Karen, and helping elderly neighbors navigate the reimbursement paperwork. Rachel took it upon herself to help organize community events small, things like potlucks, cleanup days, and a town-wide gardening project that would have once been forbidden under Karen's oppressive rule. But it wasn't all healing and progress. There were still holdouts, people who, for reasons of fear, guilt, or denial, refused to accept what Karen had done. A man named Jerry from Oak Street openly defended her at a forum, insisting she only wanted to protect property values, and that the Millers had brought chaos to a peaceful neighborhood. He was shouted down almost instantly, but it was a painful reminder that even now, her influence lingered. More troubling were the anonymous letters that began arriving at homes that supported the recall notes typed in block font, unsigned, warning them to be careful who they trusted, or that peace came at a price. Tom received 2 such letters in 1 week, each one more aggressive than the last. He turned them over to investigator Jensen, who had since expanded the scope of the inquiry to include possible accomplices. Someone is still protecting her, Jensen said during a late-night call, and they're not finished. Rachel, who had hoped Karen's arrest would mark the end, felt the dread return in waves. But she's in jail, she said. Can't hurt anyone anymore? Jensen paused. She made enemies out of everyone, but not everyone turned against her. People like Karen rarely act alone. They always have enablers. People who benefited from the chaos or feared being next. That same week, 2 residents who had spoken publicly against Karen discovered their mailboxes smashed, and the community center's bulletin board was torn down during the night. The flyers for the new election shredded and scattered across the parking lot. Surveillance footage caught a figure in a hooded sweatshirt, but the face was obscured and the car had no plates. It was clear that someone still wanted to sabotage the new order rising in Oak Ridge Hills. Meanwhile, Karen's legal case was gathering speed. She had hired a high-priced attorney from the city, funded by sources unknown, and the courtroom battle was quickly becoming the most discussed event in town history. Residents packed into City Hall for every hearing, and reporters from regional news stations camped outside the courthouse. Karen appeared calm during her first appearance, dressed in gray, her hair pulled tightly back, her expression unreadable. She pled not guilty to charges of harassment, falsification of records, financial misconduct, and criminal conspiracy. Her lawyer argued that she had acted with intent to protect her community, and that the city had overreached in stripping her of authority. But the evidence was mounting fast. Testimonies from neighbors, financial records showing HOA funds funneled into personal legal expenses, Email chains proving coordination with Craig and other outside intimidators all painted a damning picture of a woman who had ruled through manipulation and fear. Even more shocking was the discovery of a secret HOA blacklist. A document Karen had maintained detailing residents she considered non-compliant threats to her vision. The list included not just the Millers, but families who had simply asked questions at board meetings, or missed a payment by a day, or dared to fly a non-approved holiday flag. It included notes like watch closely, potential agitator, and leak risk. When the list was revealed, many gasped. It was proof not just of overreach, but of obsession. Still, someone out there was doing her bidding. After the third anonymous letter was slid under their garage door, Tom decided enough was enough. He installed motion lights, contacted private security, and began checking in daily with Jensen. "This is more than HOA drama now," she told him. "This is organized retaliation." The next night, someone cut the wires to his backyard cameras. Luckily, the front camera still worked and captured the blurry shape of a man slipping through the hedge. The city police increased patrols in the neighborhood, but the threat remained constant, like a rattlesnake hiding in tall grass. But the town didn't retreat. If anything, it became bolder. The community garden project moved forward. The election flyers were reprinted. People started speaking out louder than ever, naming names, retelling their stories. The fear that Karen had used as her weapon was no longer effective. Too many had seen the truth. When the day of the first truly democratic HOA election arrived, over 95% of the town turned out to vote. It was held in the park, under the oak trees Karen once tried to have cut down because they dropped leaves on her property. People laughed and hugged and brought lawn chairs. Tom gave a speech, not as a candidate, but as a neighbor. "We're not here to elect rulers," he said. "We're here to elect stewards, people who listen, who serve, who never forget that power belongs to the people, not the clipboard." The crowd erupted in cheers. Rachel teared up. Even the children understood something important had happened. That night, as the ballots were counted and a brand new board was announced, Tom stood quietly with Rachel and watched the neighborhood come alive again, porches lit with laughter. Families walking freely, music playing without fear of citation. But even in that moment of peace, he knew the storm wasn't completely over. In the courthouse, Karen's trial loomed. Her lawyer was demanding access to private neighborhood records, suggesting a campaign of personal destruction had been waged against her. The city prosecutors had begun pushing for more aggressive charges after uncovering tax fraud linked to her handling of HOA accounts. And more troubling than all of that, Yinzen had recently informed Tom that someone had posted bail for Karen. She was no longer in jail. "She's under house arrest, ankle monitor, travel restricted," Jensen explained. "But she's home." Rachel's voice cracked. "Back in Oak Ridge?" "No," Jensen replied. "She went to stay with her sister 2 towns over. But she's already made 3 public posts online." She's spinning the narrative. Karen had created a blog called My HOA Truth, in which she painted herself as a victim of political persecution, claiming the Millers were radicals, the city was corrupt, and that she had protected Oak Ridge from outsiders trying to turn it into a lawless free-for-all. The blog gained traction fast, especially among former HOA heads from other towns who saw Karen as a martyr. Tom knew what was happening. She wasn't just defending herself, she was rebuilding her base, slowly, patiently. Rachel was scared again. What if she comes back? Tom didn't answer right away. He looked across the street, at the place where Karen used to stand each morning, watching the neighborhood like a hawk. "Then we make sure this town is ready. We never let one person take over again." Deep down, he could feel it. The last battle hadn't been fought yet. Karen Wallace wasn't done, not by a long shot. The sun hung low over Oak Ridge Hills, casting long shadows over the freshly painted fences and neatly trimmed lawns that no longer bore the signs of fear. And while the neighborhood appeared calm on the surface, a tension still buzzed beneath it like a hidden wire under pavement. Karen Wallace was gone in body but not in spirit, and every whisper about her blog, every comment online that twisted the truth, Every faint sign of vandalism or anonymous complaint reminded the residents that her influence had not been fully erased, had simply changed form. Tom Miller knew this all too well. The blog My HOA Truth had reached over 10,000 subscribers within 3 weeks. And though most viewed it with skepticism or disgust, there was a growing minority of people from outside Oak Ridge who saw Karen as a symbol of traditional community values. Some even came to visit the town, taking pictures of the places she wrote about, trying to find the house of the so-called rebels who had taken her down. One Saturday, Tom caught 2 strangers photographing his home from a black SUV, and when confronted, they claimed to be independent journalists interested in the story behind the smear campaign. He knew better, installed more cameras, warned his neighbors, and sent the plate numbers to investigator Jensen, who by now had become less of a government contact and more of an unofficial ally. She admitted that the case against Karen was proving more complicated than expected. Charges were solid, but the trial was dragging. Karen's legal team filed motion after motion to delay proceedings, while her blog painted each delay as proof that the court system feared her truth. "We're going to get her, Tom," Jensen promised over a secure call. "But she's playing the long game now. This isn't just about Oak Ridge anymore. She wants attention. She wants a following." And that's when the first HOA chapter in another town reached Oaton HOA, that had recently elected a new board and uncovered policies eerily similar to the ones Karen used in Oak Ridge. They found documentation showing that Karen had consulted for their former president under an alias, W.K. Harrell. Tom forwarded the information to Jensen. She confirmed it matched known accounts linked to Karen's past online identities. "She's trying to replicate her model elsewhere," Jensen said grimly. "She's spreading," but that chilling revelation. Tom and Rachel called for an emergency town meeting, not with the new board, but with the community. Hundreds showed up. They gathered in the park under the old oaks, the ones Karen had once wanted to cut down. This time, there was no agenda, no strict sign-in sheet. No rigid rules, just people speaking openly, sharing their fears and planning together. Rachel took the microphone first. "This isn't about one woman anymore," she said. "About how easily we let fear become policy. How silence gave power to someone who didn't deserve it." Tom stood beside her and followed. "Karen Wallace taught us the danger of complacency. But she also taught us the power of unity. We stood up to her, and we'll stand up to anything else she sends our way." That same night, Tom posted a video to the new HOA transparency site. It was short, just 3 minutes, but powerful. It included audio clips of Karen's threats, footage of the neighborhood under her rule, and testimonies from residents who had suffered quietly for years. But more importantly, it showed the recovery, the gardens, the laughter, the kids on scooters, the lights that shined on porches without fear. The video went viral in days, gaining traction among community activists, city planners, and people across the country dealing with overreaching HOA regimes. It shifted the narrative. Karen's blog now had to rival a louder, more honest voice. But her reaction came quickly. Just 3 days after the video, her blog published a manifesto-style post titled, "The Truth Will Burn Through Lies," accusing Tom of surveillance, of manipulating city officials, and of creating a propaganda machine to silence patriotic HOA leaders. Embedded in the post was a photograph taken at night, from a distance of Tom's home, with his children visible through the front window. That was the last straw. Tom brought the post to the district attorney. Jensen launched an emergency motion for Karen's bail to be revoked. This time the court agreed. Karen Wallace was rearrested in the early hours of Thursday morning. Her sister's home was raided under warrant. Investigators found an entire digital archive, names of former HOA presidents, communications with fringe community forums, templates for fabricated complaints, and encrypted audio files of past Oak Ridge board meetings, many of which had been illegally recorded. It was enough to not only lock in her trial, but to widen the case against her, to include conspiracy across jurisdictions. As Karen was taken away in cuffs a second time, her face twisted in a defiant sneer. She turned to a reporter and hissed, "This town betrayed me. They'll pay." But this time, no one watched in silence. The footage aired live. The public saw her for what she wasn't: repentant, delusional, dangerous. And Oak Ridge rose. Over the next few months, new committees were formed. Young families began hosting neighborhood cookouts. Former victims of Karen's reign began to write their own blogs, their own stories, filled with hope, resilience, and community healing. Rachel started a local neighborhood recovery circle that helped people talk through the emotional toll of living under Karen's HOA. Tom received a letter from the mayor recognizing his efforts in defending civil rights and a private governance community. Most importantly, the town held a final voter referendum to limit HOA powers, install rotating leadership, and mandate external oversight every 5 years. It passed unanimously. On the day the new charter was signed, Tom walked alone through the park, past the bench where Karen once sat with her binoculars, past the mailbox where someone had once thrown a brick through his window, past the community board now filled with birthday party invitations, babysitter ads, and local poetry. He sat down under the biggest oak and took a deep breath. Oak Ridge Hills was no longer Karen's kingdom. It belonged to its people again. The clipboard was gone. The silence was gone. And in their place was something stronger than control: trust. And if you've followed this powerful story of fear, defiance, and community redemption, don't let it end here. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your thoughts. And make sure you subscribe to the Sham Stories YouTube channel, because there are more battles like this in towns just like yours. We're here to tell them all. Don't miss the next one. We speak truth where others stay silent.